Seeing 9 a.m. here. So good morning, folks, and welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. Welcome to our 2025 webinar series, the April edition. I'm Lane Mosier. I'm a forester with the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative, and really excited to be joined today by Megan O'Neill with the Minnesota DNR's Forest Health Team. Before I throw to Megan here, just a couple quick announcements. Our April email update went out. And so if you haven't gotten that, I'll paste a link to it in the chat. And if you'd like to receive those in the future, just make sure that you subscribe to those because that has all of our updates, all of our events, for the year, and as well as some event highlights for certain events. But otherwise, our next webinar is going to be on May 13th. That info will also be in the update. And towards the end of the hour here, when we're taking questions after Megan's presentation, I'll paste a link to request continuing ed credits. This is rated for 1 CE or CFE if you'd like SAF credit. So with that, Megan, I'll just throw to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lane. Thanks for having me here this morning, and thanks to everyone who is taking the time out of their day to listen to my presentation. I will be talking about what our forest health team found in 2024. It seems like a lifetime ago, but it really wasn't that long ago, and we do like to keep track and look back to see what happened last year to inform us about sort of what to expect going forward. So it's good to keep these things in mind as we slowly move into the growing season here in Minnesota. My presentation is going to be broken down into three general parts. First, I'm going to talk about who our team is and what we do. And then I'll talk a little bit about the new and kind of novel things we found in 2024, the fun stuff. And then lastly, I'll cover some of the ongoing forest health issues that we've been seeing in the state for multiple years. And I will leave some time at the end for questions. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, looks like my slides are advancing. Great. So first off, I want to introduce our team because we do cover the entire state of Minnesota. And this presentation will also cover the entire state of Minnesota. But first off, we have Eric Otto. He covers that teal portion of the state over in the northeast. He's based in Grand Rapids. In the Northwest, I am based out of Bemidji, and I cover kind of the north half of that yellowish orange color. And we also have Rachel, she's based in Brainerd. She covers the southern half of our Northwest territory. She also works at the state forest nursery, helping them with forest health issues and a lot of other work. August Kramer is our newest member of our team, and we're super happy to have him. He's based in St. Paul and has been with us for a little while now and is really helping us do some excellent work down there. Brian Schwingle is our program coordinator. He's been with the state for a very long time, so we're really lucky to have him in that role, keeping us all moving forward and doing the important work. And then lastly, Gentry Carlson, he is our aerial surveyor. He does a ton of work for us that otherwise we would not be able to find the forest health issues that we have. And so we're really grateful to have him as part of our team. No, let's see. Here we go. So part of what Gentry does for us and helps us do is coordinating our annual forest health survey. We fly over the entire forested part of the state. So you can kind of see in that orange color the area that Gentry flew in 2024, and he's housed in our resource assessment department within the DNR. And then Southeast Minnesota is flown every other year. A lot of that is looking for emerald ash borer and seeing how that's progressing down there. You can see the red dots on the map there. Those are the polygons that Gentry marked from the sky as he was flying over the forest where he saw forest health issues. So this survey is best at mapping large landscape level disturbances. So, the one or two trees in your yard that are declining, we're not going to be able to notice that. But things like spruce budworm, especially over in the northeast there, eastern large beetle, all these bigger issues. We definitely picked that up on aerial survey, and then this information is all available to the public. We also worked really hard at keeping our website updated. We're actually working on that right now as a group. So if you have general forest health questions, this is a great resource that you should go to first to see if you can kind of get some of the answers that you've been looking for. I mean, you can always call one of the forest health specialists, but doing this on your own, especially if it's a yard tree issue, this will get you a long way. So you can see on the left-hand side there, all of our common issues that we get questions about, burrow blight, diplodia, spongy moth. There's a lot of really good resources there available for you if you're looking for those sorts of things. We also post our annual report here every year, and these go back quite a ways into time. I think back into the 50s or 60s. So if you have historic forest health questions that you really need answers to, you can always go back and read those old reports. Otherwise, you can go ahead and check out what we did last year. And a lot of the information that I am going to be talking about can be found in these reports. So if you have questions on specifically how many acres of damage you are seeing in your part of the state, or if you want to know, things about some of the smaller issues that we recorded, this is a great resource to go and look up some of those questions. This is our Forest Health Annual Report cover from 2024. Some really nice emerald ash borer damage there. And then I'm gonna move into the new issues that we found in 2024. So this is kind of the things that maybe we had we're scratching our heads about, or we were really surprised that maybe, a common thing that we see every year was a bigger issue. And one of the contributing factors to that this year, well, in 2024, was our weather. And I don't think you can talk about forest health without talking about the weather these days, it seems like. So we had one of the wettest May through June periods on record in Minnesota. So that early 2024 growing season was very, very wet. That definitely affected some of the issues that we saw. And then overall, we had a return of above normal precip in that early part of the growing season that benefited the forest, the trees, plenty of moisture, also benefited some of the um, fungal diseases that we'll talk about later. So you kind of saw this increase in rain, increase in leaf diseases, and then moving into the fall, we definitely saw a decrease in precipitation. The first thing that I want to talk about was a new one to the state, confirmed for the first time in Minnesota. It was confirmed in St. Paul. And if you can see where that arrow is pointing to, there's a nice little larva there. And this is the elm zigzag sawfly. It's a non-native defoliator of elm trees. We don't expect this pest to be a significant issue in the state, but we do want to know where it is and where it's causing damage. And when they're little, like it is in the picture, you can see that really, it's a zigzag pattern in the leaf that it's eating, goes back and forth, back and forth. So if you're seeing that kind of damage, it's pretty easy to correlate that with the elm zigzag sawfly. As they get older, they're definitely capable of doing quite significant damage. So you can see that elm tree on the right-hand side of the screen, mostly defoliated except for the midribs and some of those main veins of the leaves. So, this is one that it can cause some damage. Oh, sorry, my screen just advanced there. It can cause some damage, but we're not super concerned about it in the state. Um, the defoliation could definitely weaken trees, which then other pests or diseases could come along and cause issues. If you do happen to see elm zigzag sawfly damage in your part of the state, please report it to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. They have this great online reporting form for the report a pest. You can also email them. Also, there's the Great Lakes Early Detection Network app that you can put that information into. Or if you want, just give them a call and let them know what you're seeing. But we really appreciate these reports, especially of invasive species, going into this report a pest program, so it's all in one place and experts can look at it to see if the damage that you're seeing is consistent with the damage caused by that insect. And the next one that we had a little bit of damage in more of the southern part of the state was this box elder defoliator. It is caused by damage caused by a native insect, and they defoliated quite a few box elders in southeast Minnesota. It was a lot worse sort of on the bottom of these ridges, as you can kind of see in that upper photo where the bottom part, you can see the trees were being defoliated. Healthy trees can handle quite a few years of defoliation. So we're not concerned about this in the long term. I know a lot of people kind of look down on box elder trees, so maybe they even thought it was great to have these box elder leaf rollers around. But you know, box elder sometimes it might be the only tree you have in that area, so we do want to keep them healthy. It's one that we'll just keep an eye on. For whatever reason, the population definitely went up a little bit, but we don't expect long-term damage because of these guys. One of the more interesting things that I think happened last year was the fungal leaf diseases that we were seeing. Like I was saying earlier, with all of that early spring rain, we were seeing really widespread fungal leaf diseases, especially in the earlier part of the growing season throughout the entire state. A lot of different species were being affected. Up here in northern Minnesota, ash and oaks, I was getting a lot of calls about them. Maple, lilacs, also kind of the middle part of the state, we were having issues with. And then, you know, the poplar trees as well. We were seeing a lot of damage on those. And that damage seemed to show up a little more into the middle of the growing season and later on. Anthracnose was one of the really common species that was affecting multiple species. And then we were seeing lots of different stuff on oak trees as well, including anthracnose, oak leaf, blister, and a couple other ones. The leaf diseases on poplar trees across Minnesota was severe in some locations and then very mild in others. The picture on the left I really like because it shows really what we were seeing in the forest, where you would have one clone of aspen that were really affected by these leaf diseases, and then the clone right next to it completely not impacted. So it was kind of spotty across the state. It just as you were driving, you would really notice some areas hit really heavily hard by these leaf diseases. Other areas weren't quite as bad. This is an up close picture on what we were seeing. So a lot of these brown lesions, smaller leaves, leaves yellowing and dying and falling off earlier. The crowns were really sparse, and it could be really clumpy where you would see it. Marsanina was confirmed on trembling aspen and big-tooth aspen, and that was from samples that we sent down to the plant disease clinic at the university. We didn't send a ton of samples because once we kind of confirmed what was going on, we used that information and extrapolated that. And then on balsam poplar, they were really heavily affected by the Septoroides species. And again, we didn't send a ton of samples in, so these leaf diseases could have been common across all different poplar species. Just a couple more pictures to kind of give you an idea of what we were seeing on our big tooth aspen there, as well as balsam poplar. I know a lot of people mention that balsam poplar in the later part of the growing season doesn't look very good anyway. In 2024, they looked especially bad. And then a couple of the other fungal leaf diseases that we saw across the state was, maple with anthracnose, oak leaf blister, and then ash with anthracnose as well. I was getting a ton of calls in early spring about ash dropping all of their leaves just as they were leafing out. Most of those trees had a second flush of leaves and they looked perfectly fine by the middle of the summer. Some of them, the crowns were pretty sparse, but I imagine that they will continue to grow and look good and not be an issue, especially if we continue with this more, well, at least up in northern Minnesota, it's been a more dry spring so far. Moving away a little bit from the fungal leaf diseases into some insect issues, we saw sawfly damage on older red pine needles in the more of the central part of the state. This damage was attributed to European pine sawfly on red pine. I believe that so in Anoka County and Stearns County, they are also found on some Scots pine. They affected scattered pines across the area, so not a huge amount of defoliation on individual trees. And then as far as on a stand in general, we would see more scattered defoliation. It's interesting because the sawfly, it doesn't feed on new needles. It eats the older pine needles, which is pretty interesting, but also kind of nice for the tree because it may have been, it might be shedding those older needles this year anyway, so not causing a ton of damage. And then it has the new growth that it will have for this year moving forward. If we see defoliation for 2 or more consecutive years in a row, especially if it's heavy defoliation, then that can cause issues for conifer trees. On white pine, especially in the Two Harbors area, we confirmed pine leaf adelgid damage. Pine leaf adelgid is a native insect that can cause shoot damage on white pine. You can see the damage, especially on the picture on the right. You can see those yellow needles that are dying and falling off. Their feeding can also result in this drooping or twisting or kind of distorted growth. So if you are just glancing at some of these trees, you might think perhaps that it's herbicide damage. It kind of has that same distorted growth pattern, but if you get some of these samples underneath a microscope, you can see the adelgid. And we've been seeing sort of sporadic damage from this insect in northeast Minnesota since 2019, but this past year there was more severe defoliation in the Two Harbors area. And I've been talking to foresters and landowners the last couple of months, and it sounds like outside of Lake County, some people might be seeing this as well, because you can see these adelgids are so small, it's really hard to say that this is your issue if you're only in the field. Um, so if you're seeing damage like this on a white pine, and you think that it's a problem, you can definitely call one of your forest health specialists and we can look into the issue a little bit to see if this is what the issue is and see if this is more of a widespread issue than what we originally thought. And then one of the last new things for 2024 was lilacs blooming in the fall. I got a lot of questions about why the lilacs were blooming in the fall. Um, I don't deal a lot with lilacs or shrubs or ornamentals, but the University of Minnesota did a really nice article about Why lilacs were blooming had a lot to do with the weather, and that yes, they will bloom in the spring, maybe not as much as they would have, but they're not gonna, it's not killing the tree or the shrub, so don't worry too much about your lilacs. All right, next I'm going to go into some of the ongoing issues that as a forest health team we deal with every year. The first one I want to talk about is bur oak blight. It's a leaf disease of bur oaks caused by a native fungus. Less than 1% of all bur oaks on the landscape were affected by this last year, but in some areas it was worse than others. I would say especially southern Beltrami County and a little bit north of that, we saw pretty significant borough blight damage in late July, early August. But once you got outside of that area, it seemed like there wasn't too much damage from borough blight on bur oaks. Um, Burglight was more widely reported in 2024 than 2023, so a little uptick in that. And again, most of that in central and northern Minnesota. Trees with heavy bur blight infections have been tracked for multiple years. And what we see is even with severe bur oak blight damage and defoliation, come spring, those trees leaf out perfectly fine. The canopies look very healthy. Sometimes they will get bur oak blight again in the growing season and look bad again in the fall, but we haven't seen any mortality because of bur oak blight, if it's just bur oak blight. So it's one that we track every year, but is not one that we consider a tree killer. Oak wilt has been slowly spreading north in Minnesota. This is one that we work really hard to track exactly where it is and then do management whenever possible because oak wilt is a deadly disease and it will kill all of the oak species that we have here in Minnesota. And it's caused by a non-native, so an invasive fungus. This one, we do a lot of outreach and education. So if you haven't heard about it or if you need more information on it, please reach out to your forest health specialist and we'll be happy to talk to you about it and get you any resources that you may need. There's a couple of pictures that show how quickly oak wilt can kill a tree. So you can see early or mid-June there, a little bit of wilting in the canopy, but a lot of green leaves still, especially on the oak to the right. And then by the end of August, you can see that both of those oaks are totally dead. It can kill mature red oak trees very quickly in, the course of a couple of weeks, couple months. White oaks can live multiple years with oak wilt, but eventually they will die. And this video just shows typical oak wilt mortality. It spreads in these pockets. So once a tree is infected with oak wilt, it can infect the oaks next to it by this fungus moves down the trunk and through the roots to the neighboring oak trees. And then it moves through the stand in that way, causing these pockets. And we every year will update our map. We continue to very closely monitor oak wilt. So you can see on the map on the right hand side of the screen there, that black area is where we consider oak wilt common. That's not where we are focusing our resources to do control currently because it's a little bit too many trees too many areas have oak wilt, and we wouldn't be effective at slowing the spread of it at this time in those areas. The gray counties are counties with confirmed oak wilt, and it might just be, one little spot in that county, and then the blue dots are those confirmed oak wilt sites outside of uh, oak, the area that we consider oak wilt to be common in. We have some really good resources, as I mentioned. We created a handout about oak wilt that will talk, it talks all about the disease, how it's spread, what you can do to reduce the spread, as well as some options for control. We also have an excellent resource on our webpage that is very in-depth into control options for landowners and for forest managers as well. So if you're interested in that, you can always go to our website. And then we have another article, another handout that we published a couple years ago about how to tell the difference between oak wilt and two-line chestnut borer damage, especially during some of our droughtier years. These things can be really difficult to tell apart. So we tried to create a resource that would be helpful. But it's always a good idea to send in samples to the plant disease clinic if you think you have oak wilt in an area that oak wilt is not common. We have a ton of guidance available. So our DNR Forest Oak Wilt Guide is on our website. And then one of the messages that we like to get out there early and often is to not prune your oaks between April and July. So we're now into that time period. And this is the time where the insects that spread oak wilt fungus are more active and the trees are able to get infected with oak wilt. So if you prune your trees, those beetles will be attracted to those pruning wounds and could potentially be spreading oak wilt. So if you do need to prune a tree during that time period, we recommend painting that wound very quickly after you prune it so that the fungus can't get into the tree. Oak wilt is very expensive to control, so doing a little bit of prevention can save you a lot of money and a lot of trees in the long run. The next issue that I think is really important, especially it seems to be in the northern part of Minnesota, is oak decline. And decline goes along with two-line chestnut borer and armillaria root disease. We've been seeing a lot of oak decline, especially in older oaks. Excuse me. And wait, mute just for a second because I need a cough. Sorry about that. So we've been noticing a lot of pockets of, these red or brown leaves left in the canopy and dead tips of trees. It seems like depending on where you are in the state, it's affecting different species of oak. I'm seeing it a lot in bur oak in, northern Minnesota, Bemidji, if you go over to Detroit Lakes area, I've seen a lot in bur oak, and then it seems like a little bit more in the central and southern part of the state, it's affecting the red oaks a little bit more heavily. Mm. Oh, now my slide. Okay, there we go. It's been on the rise in recent years since I started working with the DNR, and I would say over the last 5 or 6 years, I've really been getting a lot more reports of oak decline. And it results in this multi-year gradual loss of mature trees across the landscape. It starts with a little bit of dieback in the canopy. And then over the next couple of years, it slowly progresses to tree mortality. Declines in forest health and forestry are pretty hard to track because it takes a while to know you're in a decline. And so, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm back. We look at this decline spiral to give you an idea of how these things work. So you'll have sort of these environmental or predisposing factors. It might be soil compaction, or if we're have a really snowy winter, a lot of salt gets put down on the roads and that gets into the environment. After that, those trees are a little bit stressed. They might then be going into a drought or have a late spring frost. So you get a second factor that's affecting them. And then sort of one of the last issues that comes along is these forest health issues, either like an insect or a disease that on its own would not cause any problems, but with all the other factors leads into this death spiral. Um, the picture here, I think, is a really good one of a lot of what I have been seeing. I would say this tree is in its second or third year of showing symptoms of decline, and you can see those dead tips. And then along the main trunk of the tree, the leaves are really close to the trunk, a lot of epicormic sprouts, and they kind of have this fuzzy appearance. So one of the factors in oak decline is two-line chestnut borer. It's one of our native species. We expect to see it in the environment. But what we've been noticing the last couple of years is the populations are really starting to increase. And so with the increase in population, they're causing more and more damage. They, the larva tunnels under the bark and eats the cambium and the live tissue down there, a lot like what you see with emerald ash borer. And you get these galleries underneath there, kind of a zigzag back and forth pattern. And the adult beetle, um, as it's emerging from the tree, leaves a D-shaped exit hole, a little bit smaller than what you see with emerald ash borer. The next part of this oak decline issue that we're seeing is armillaria root disease. It's a native fungal disease, and we see it in across the entire state in most of our forests. Healthy trees usually don't have any problem resisting infection, but as trees are stressed and declining, this fungus will move into a tree, and it creates these white mycelial fans underneath the bark. They're especially easy to see, I think, in red oak trees, or sorry, red pine trees as you're cutting away the bark. You can see the bark sloughs off really easily, and then you can see the fungus underneath there is that white substance. And then also, we have a lot of older oak trees in our forest. A lot of private landowners have planted oaks and encouraged oaks across the landscape, and they are more susceptible to oak decline. And then, of course, we've been having some crazy weather. So you can see there in 2014, we had one of the wettest years in that central part of the state. 2016, another really wet year, in different, little bit different part of the state, but still very wet. 2019, another wet year. And then, of course, in 2021, we had a pretty severe drought, especially across the north and north central part of the state. And then 2023, we also had a really dry year. So these back and forth between wet and dry is really stressing trees out as well, which leaves them more susceptible to these forest health issues. Next, I'm going to talk about emerald ash borer and some of the impacts that we've been seeing in the forest. Ash is an extremely important tree here in Minnesota, both culturally and environmentally. So now that we're starting to see emerald ash borer infections in more of a forested setting, it's concerning to the forest health team and forest managers across the state. So there's a lot of discussions going into how to manage this and what we should be doing moving forward. We have a lot of ash trees in our riparian areas and then in our wet forests as well. It's very dominated by ash right now. There used to be a lot more elm in there, but those trees were removed from those systems largely in part to Dutch elm disease. So one of the issues moving forward is if we get emerald ash borer in a forested setting where it's a large swath of ash trees, we might lose our forest cover type entirely in those areas. This map has been updated recently, but there are currently 54 counties either fully or partially quarantined because of emerald ash borer in Minnesota. So you can see how this is moving. It started in the cities and has been spreading out from there. That Fargo find was about 2 winters ago now that they found it there in Fargo. And then some area around Hackensack and Reamer, those were recent finds as well. So you can see it spreading out in kind of these satellite populations. This spread across the state has happened in just about 15 years. So it's slower, it's moving slower than it has in other states, but still moving pretty quickly in terms of how quickly forests can be replanted and managed and grow. So it's something that we're taking seriously and working on finding some solutions to some big issues with our partners. If you think you have emerald ash borer in an area that's not on this map, not quarantined already, please reach out to a local forester or your forest health specialist or to Minnesota Department of Ag. We are really happy to work with you to get that confirmed and then get that on the map so we can track it. Luckily, we in Minnesota have some very cold winters. Depending on how you feel about that, it can be either good or bad, but either way, emerald ash borer is killed when we have temperatures that get to -30, which is not heard of, not unheard of, especially in northern Minnesota. So when we hit that -30, we can expect between 70 and 90% of emerald ash borer to be killed. So that is at least one benefit and one reason that emerald ash borer spread will be slow across the state. So just to kind of emphasize what that means, if we look at our past winters, you can see this green area. That is where our winter temperatures were cold enough that EAB spread would have been severely limited. And then in this yellow areas, these winter in those areas have been cold enough that it would have limited the spread of EAB. So not kill it entirely, but definitely slow those populations down, which is a really huge benefit for us. We expect moving forward to have scattered confirmations of emerald ash borer pretty much across the state. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised of it showing up anywhere, especially where people tend to either move firewood or move, um, camping equipment, things like that, seems to be one of the indicators of where we've been finding emerald ash borer. We do still have time to work on diversifying some of our forests, so planting with other species, doing some harvesting of ash, and replanting while we can. It's estimated that it's still going to be 2 decades before we find it throughout the entire part of the state, so sort of um, ubiquitous across Minnesota, but it will take a lot longer before we lose all of our ash trees from, well, not all, but most of our ash trees from emerald ash borer. Some of the recommendations that we have is to report any infested ash beyond the known range. Homeowners, if you have a ash tree in your yard that you want to save, once emerald ash borer is known to be in your area and you have healthy ash trees still, you definitely would want to consider treating those trees if that's something that you're interested in doing. That's an ongoing treatment. So just think about the investment in that moving forward. And then consider planting diverse species in these stands that are heavy to ash. If you're a forester or a private landowner who has some wet ash forest, start doing some planting now, even if it's not a ton of trees and you don't have a ton of time or resources to put into it. Doing a little bit of work now is really going to help you in the future. Some of the species that we recommend are swamp white oak, um, American elm, and yes, we know Dutch elm disease is an issue, but it's better to have some trees, even if they're smaller trees than no trees. Balsam poplar is one that the state has been working on a little bit, doing some experimenting with balsam poplar whips. This project, well, this idea was sort of kicked off by the feds on the national forest, harvesting and planting these poplar whips. So you go out and you can cut small pieces of poplar tree, of the balsam poplars, and then you put them in rooting hormone and can then just stick them in the ground. Um, it depends on the site. There's been some varying success with this, but it is a quick and easy option to get a lot of trees in the ground very quickly. And then in some sites, northern white cedar might also be an appropriate species to plant. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about spruce budworm and what we've seen from spruce budworm across the state. Spruce budworm is a native insect and its preferred host is balsam fir. And we've also seen some white spruce death from defoliation from this insect as well, especially in the northeast and in the angle there, you can see how much defoliation the state is experiencing from spruce budworm. It's been an ongoing issue there for a very long time. If you've ever been up there or you live or own property up there, you've noticed it. And then in the last few years, we've been seeing a lot more spruce budworm damage in the western part of the state, and that has been mostly in white spruce plantations, older plantations that a lot of them have already been impacted by some other, you know, either weather event, forest health event, something else, and then we see spruce budworm really defoliating and causing a lot of damage in those areas as well. We have really good records of defoliation in Minnesota going back to 1954, and you can see a population booms and busts over the years. But in 2024, it was one of the highest years we've seen since I think back in the late 50s, early 60s, so a lot of defoliation this year. It was pretty interesting that defoliation acres are going up and up. So it, I'm excited to see what we find in 2025, if we are going to keep going up or if we've hit sort of a peak and expect to go back down. There's really no indication that spruce budworm defoliation is going to slow down. We expect it to be an ongoing issue in the state. So just keep that in mind if you have a lot of balsam fir. One of the issues might be because of how much balsam fir we have on the landscape in northeast Minnesota. So diversifying forests over there is a really good idea if you have property and you want to work on that. Contact a local forester to come up with a plan. Funding is available for landowners to either clean up dead balsam fir, especially if you are concerned about forest fires. Having dead trees on your landscape isn't a great thing. And then also there's money available for planting projects. There's some research as well going on at the University of Minnesota about spruce budworm population dynamics. So that'll be interesting to know, to hear more as they develop their research. We'll expect to hear from them. General guidance, it's similar to a lot of our other forest health issues, but forest diversity is key. You want to have as many different species that are appropriate for that site out on the landscape, so that if you lose all your balsam fir, you're not losing your entire forest. Again, reducing how much balsam fir you have in these spruce fir stands is highly recommended. If possible, salvage, harvest dying and dead trees if there's a market for that. We recommend building resiliency for our future forests, diversity, all of those basic forestry principles that we really encourage with good stewardship. And if you have high value trees or high value area, you could consider spraying, targeting those younger caterpillars. It's not something that the state does nor will we do in the future, but it is available in certain situations. Okay, moving on to another really widespread issue is eastern large beetle. I'm sure everyone on this webinar has heard about it, but I still want to touch on it just so you know what we're seeing with this ongoing issue. This map shows all of the acres impacted, not killed, but impacted by eastern large beetle between 2001, when we first started noticing it being an issue, to last year. So you can see anywhere where we have tamarack, just about we seem to have eastern large beetle damage. At this point, 90% of Minnesota's tamarack have been impacted. So yes, there are still a couple of pockets out there that have not been impacted, but we expect that they will be soon. Eastern large beetle is a native insect that has, been causing huge amounts of damage over the last 23, 24 years now. The accumulated acres keeps going up and up because as we track that, we keep adding and adding more acres. But the newly affected acres, so acres that were not impacted in previous years, has started to go down. Part of that, though, is because there's just less acres on the landscape that were not previously impacted. Again, unfortunately, there's no sign that this outbreak will be stopping any time soon. But we do still consider tamarack a great tree for Minnesota, a great species for Minnesota. It's native, it's resilient to a lot of issues. It can inhabit some of these wetter areas that not a lot of other trees are living in. So we're not discouraging planting or managing for tamarack. Infested stands are naturally regenerating, not just to tamarack, but to other species as well. So that's really encouraging to see because, of course, with this many acres damaged, we're not able to go out and plant or aerial seed all of these stands. So it's good that the research has been done to look at regeneration in these stands, and they're regenerating some to trees and then as well as some to shrubs and other cover. But we're glad that this is kind of a bright spot in the future. And then lastly, unfortunately, another issue for our tamarack trees is large case bear. In 2024, we mapped 45,000 acres of defoliation by a large case bear um, across the state. This is an invasive insect, so it's one that it's also affecting tamarack, and it might be predisposing these trees, stressing them out, that um, eastern large-beetle can also come in and then finish them. So over the last couple of years, this population seems to really be increasing. So we're going to be keeping an eye on this one moving forward as well. Okay, so that is my presentation about forest health and our forest health updates for last year. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer them at this time. Maybe Lane can come back on and help moderate some of that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. We do have a couple questions. If you're able to talk a bit towards Gentry's work, is Gentry using a sketchpad system when he maps the disease locations? And then two, has Gentry had a chance to look at some of the new AI tools with really fine resolution commercial satellite imagery to help better focus the aerial survey work?
Yeah, so yep, Gentry does use a tablet and he flies. It's typically 6 mile flight lines back and forth across the forested part of the state, looks out the window, and on the tablet sketches out where he's seeing damage on the ground. And he is really excellent at this work. And he's able to attribute what is causing that damage and recording that information. Of course, if he isn't sure what it is, he'll stay unknown, and our forest health team, along with him, do our best to go out and ground truth a little bit of that information. It's a huge amount of data, so we don't get to all of it. So that's how Gentry does his work. It starts in the southern part of the state and he moves north as the growing season goes on. So it is it's not perfect. We do miss some of those ephemeral things. If there's something in northern Minnesota that happens early in the spring when we're not flying, of course, we're not going to map it. Speaking to the AI tools and some of that high resolution satellite imagery, he and our team have done a little bit of that kind of work, not with AI, but with using high resolution imagery, especially looking at oak wilt pockets because they're so hard to find and because it's such an important issue. But it's one of those things moving forward. I do suspect we will do more of that kind of work. If there's AI tools, that'd be really great. One of our colleagues with the Forest Service is fantastic, and she's always coming up with some of these new programs and new ideas of how to look at forest health issues using different imagery. So this is kind of our bread and butter. It's consistent, and we know that it works, but we do use other tools to try and drill down a little bit for some of those more nuanced things. So I hope that answers the question as much as I can. Otherwise, I can definitely put you in touch with Gentry if you have more specific questions as well.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. Speaking of oak wilt, will the 2024 oak wilt guide be available on the website soon? The current website link is for 22.
Yep, that should be Thanks for letting us know. So we do try to keep that updated. So I'm a little bit surprised that it's from 22, but yeah, it should be up there soon. At the end of this month, we're having a meeting to update our websites. So I expect that update will be done at the end of April.
Awesome. Great. So end of April. And then kind of on the oak wilt train. So we had a couple questions that I'll group together here. Are you
Mhm.
finding that the white oak group species surviving oak wilt, or is it just that their mortality is just drawn out longer than the red oak group species?
Yep. So they are dying, but the mortality takes multiple years, is what we're seeing. If it's a stressed white oak, that we will see mortality sooner, but healthy, vigorous white oaks that are infected with oak wilt do die. It just takes multiple years.
And then with that, have y'all seen any specific impact from oak wilt on swamp white oak, or is it just kind of affected like the rest of the white oak group?
Um, so I don't, I haven't looked specifically, you know, swamp white oak versus bur oak, how quickly they're dying in comparison. It's a really good question. Maybe a good question for a researcher or someone from the University of Minnesota to look at. I wouldn't be surprised if people have already looked at that sort of thing as well. But unfortunately, I don't know enough to speak on that right now.
Awesome. Well, maybe that's also a plug here too for the Great Lakes Silviculture Library. Just to plug that, I
Yes.
shared one case study, and if there's any foresters who have acres to manage here on the call, I'd encourage you all to test out and experiment with some of these um, silvicultural solutions to forest health issues. And might not be as robust as a paper, but that allows at least some insight to folks to allow them to give other foresters something to go off of. And I've
Yep.
also linked separately, I've also linked our CE request form if folks would like that. Uh,
And just another plug for the Silviculture Library. We look at that as well when people come up to us with questions about case studies or ideas. We like to take a look at that and see, maybe this has already been done and what worked and what didn't work. So a great resource that if anyone has anything to add to that library, please do. Otherwise, it's a great reference tool as well.
Great. So I just paste that link as well. And again, just a friendly reminder in the chat, we do have that CE request form. So please fill that out. And then got time for maybe for this last question here. Can you describe further what quarantine looks like with regards to EAB?
Yeah, really good question. So the Minnesota Department of Ag regulates the movement of regulated material. So, in this case, ash logs. And so it really impacts the way that, especially loggers and mills, do their work. So they need to get permits to be able to move that material across quarantines. So if you are within a quarantine, if your entire county is quarantined, you're within a quarantine. You can move material, ash material within that quarantine. If you're outside of a quarantine and you're staying outside of a quarantine area, you can move material freely. But it's that going back and forth between non-quarantine and quarantine that you need to have paperwork that you can get from MDA to move regulated material. I know that's a really broad question, and so that's kind of the short answer. If you're looking for more specific information, I would recommend visiting the Minnesota Department of Ag Emerald Ash Borer page, and they have a lot of good resources and contact information there as well.
Great. Thanks. And I think maybe just one more quick question here from Simon. Has silver maple or American sycamore, to your knowledge, been experimented with in ash stands in response to EAB?
Um, yeah, silver maple definitely has. There's some areas where it's been more successful, some areas where it's been less successful. This is, one of those things that as people are experimenting with these tree species, if you are doing this kind of work, putting it into the Great Lakes Silviculture Library is fantastic, so that we can look and see what's going on. And then with sycamore, I'm not as sure about that, especially in northern Minnesota. I don't know of anyone I haven't heard of anyone planting it. In southern Minnesota, I wouldn't be surprised if people are trying that, but I don't think it's happening on state land. I might be wrong, but I haven't heard about it. People planting sycamore on state land as a replacement species for emerald ash borer, but on private land and some wetter forests, I wouldn't be surprised if people are giving that a try because it is one of those species that does really well in those riparian areas in not necessarily the southern United States, but more south than us.
Sure. And yeah, thanks, Andrew. You beat me to it here that yeah, they have planted sycamore and southern source silver maples at the Crosby Farm experiment in St. Paul. So there is data and efforts, and I know Lydia Bothrup and others have been working on that project in the Silva Lab, and I know I'm missing some partners here, but
Yeah,
um,
yeah. There's a ton of
great.
people doing a lot of really good work out there. And so this is just a small portion of what we're observing. But if you have, more specific questions about some of the details, Lane, I'm sure can get you a lot of the information. Otherwise, my contact information is up on the website. So feel free to reach out to me too.
Great. And with that, it's 10 a.m. So thanks so much, Megan, for a really great presentation. Thanks to the audience here for joining and asking so many questions here. This is awesome to have this engagement and the like. We will have this recording posted to our YouTube channel here over the next couple of days. So that's the Sustainable Forest Education Cooperative channel on YouTube. We have a playlist of all of our webinars. Yeah, thank you all so much and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.